I'm Hannah Cole, 33 years old, and on a clear Thursday evening I stood in my kitchen, smoothing cocoa over a pan of tiramisu for my mother, when my phone lit up with a message that pulled the air out of the room. "Don't come tonight. Sabrina doesn't feel comfortable. We'll catch up another time." I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the words to rearrange into something kinder. The spoon I was holding tapped once against the glass dish and went quiet, like even it knew the conversation was over before it began. In the window, the city was turning on its lights block by block, as if houses everywhere were getting ready for dinners I was no longer invited to. I set the dessert in the fridge and stared at my reflection, a woman who knew better than to ask why and who asked anyway. The answer came, and it wasn't really an answer at all, keeping the peace. I told them I understood, even though nothing about it felt like peace. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever been left out by people who should have known better, tap like and subscribe, so this story finds the ones who need it. I grew up in a house that ran on schedules and steady hands, a place where pager beeps and hospital calls threaded through dinner like a second conversation. My father wore the authority of a cardiologist, the way some men wear a suit, and my mother balanced compassion with order as the head nurse down the hall from him. They loved routines, clean counters, and children who colored inside the lines, and they loved telling anyone who asked that their daughter would be a doctor one day, because Hannah has the discipline for it, while my little brother Ryan was still figuring out where his spark will land. I was dutiful until I wasn't the first time I stood under a rotunda at the public library and felt sound lift and bend along the dome. I knew my future lived in blueprints, not operating rooms. When I said architecture out loud at 17, my mother straightened the table runner, and my father folded his napkin in half and told me brilliance like mine shouldn't be wasted, which felt less like a compliment and more like the door to a life I hadn't chosen swinging shut. They were kind in all the ordinary ways, rides to school in the rain, warm casseroles after long days, but the kindness had a shape to it, and I learned early that acceptance fit best when it lined up with what they already pictured. College was a patchwork of scholarships and late-night studio critiques that ran past midnight and morning coffee that tasted like determination. I learned to stretch a paycheck to fix a drafty window with weather stripping to celebrate the small victories, because no one at home saw much to celebrate in buildings that didn't house patients. I rented a narrow apartment with creaky floors and a stubborn radiator. And when I visited on Sundays, Ryan would pull into the driveway in a car my parents said he needed to get himself situated, while my father asked how the drawing thing was going and whether I'd thought about taking the MCATs just to keep doors open. I said I was happy. They nodded, as if happiness were a temporary condition you measure, while waiting for test results, and they pivoted to Ryan's latest attempt at a major or a job which always seemed to come with another safety net. None of it felt cruel in the moment. It was 1,000 almosts, almost listening, almost proud, until the accumulation of almosts became its own kind of silence. By 33, I'd become the youngest senior architect at our firm, the one asked into rooms where decisions got made, the one trusted to lead the early concept work for a cultural center that would anchor a neighborhood I cared about. That news lived on my desk under a paperweight, and in the way Edward looked at me during meetings, weighing where I might go next. But it lived quietly at home, because medicine still outranked masonry, no matter how many people those spaces might touch. Sabrina came into our orbit in a season when I was too busy to do more than notice the way praise gathered around her like a scarf. She arrived with soft phrases about family and admiration, and finding her people and my parents warmed to that ease because she said the right things in the right tone, and sometimes that's all it takes. I met her twice and tried to be gracious, then watched as she began posting Sunday photos in their kitchen, her arm tucked into my mother's captions about blessings and belonging, while my name slid out of the weekly group texts until the calendar felt bare, where it used to be full. The message that night landed hard because it wasn't really about dinner, and I knew that even as I rinsed the cocoa from the spoon, it was about who gets to call a family meeting and who has to wait outside the door. I told myself it was temporary, that next week would be different, but the quiet ran deeper than a schedule change, and I could feel it settling into the corners of the house. I sat at the kitchen table, let the fridge hum fill the space, and thought about a folder in my desk drawer with signatures that might matter more than anyone remembered. A small piece of paper I hadn't looked at in years because I'd hoped never to need it. The city lights were bright by then, and the tiramisu would keep, and I told myself to rest, to go to work in the morning, to do the next right thing. I didn't know it yet, but that small text would be the first thread pulled from a careful weave, and by the time the fabric loosened, there would be nothing left to pretend about. The week after that text, silence settled over my phone like dust on a forgotten shelf. No calls from my mother asking about my day. No quick notes from my father about a new medical article, not even a forwarded joke from Ryan. The following Sunday, I drove past their house out of habit. Through the dining room window, I caught a glimpse of them around the table, 4 place settings, soft laughter drifting out between the curtains. My mother's hand brushed against Sabrina's as she passed the salad bowl, a small gesture I'd seen her reserve for family. My chair sat empty, tucked neatly against the wall, as if it had been that way for years. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment, letting the image settle before pulling away. The next day, my mother called with a bright voice that didn't match her words. "We're moving dinner to 5 on Sundays now," she said, as if announcing a change in the weather. "You're probably busy anyway." I said sure that I understood, even though she didn't ask if I wanted to come. It became the first of many polite dismissals that arrived disguised as consideration. When Easter came, my phone stayed quiet. I found out through social media Sabrina had posted a photo in front of my parents' house pastel dress, flowing captioned, "Family traditions are everything." My mother commented with a string of hearts. The following week, my father texted to say they'd keep Mother's Day simple this year. By July, the invitations had stopped altogether. My name faded from group messages, replaced by a steady stream of photos that never included me. Barbecues, birthday cakes, the lake house dock glowing orange at sunset. For months, I tried to understand how a woman who'd known us barely a season had managed to become the center of every memory. Sabrina had a gift for saying what people wanted to hear. She praised my father's discipline, admired my mother's grace under pressure, and told Ryan that his creativity was too big for college to contain. She brought flowers every Sunday, snapped pictures of homemade pies, and filled her captions with words like blessed family and grateful. Each one seemed to erase a little more of the history I shared with them. The first time I confronted my mother about it, I kept my voice calm. "Mom, I saw you change the photos in the hallway." "Oh, Sabrina thought it would be nice to refresh the decor," she said. "You know, make her feel included, even if that means taking mine down." She sighed, not unkindly. "You have your own place now, honey. Those were from when you lived here." I hung up without arguing. It wasn't just the pictures. It was everything, the subtle ways she shifted the balance until I didn't fit anywhere. Sabrina wasn't openly cruel. She didn't need to be. Instead, she smiled while saying things that landed like small paper cuts. "Hannah's so lucky to be independent," she'd say, smiling sweetly. "I could never live so far from my parents." Or, "It must be nice to focus on buildings instead of people." My parents nodded along, hearing warmth where I heard warning. By midsummer, the exclusions turned practical. My father mentioned that Ryan and Sabrina needed help with an apartment deposit. He said it like a passing detail, but later I learned they'd given them $20,000. When I'd asked for $3,000 years earlier to buy design software in grad school, I'd been told it would build character to figure it out myself. 2 months later, they bought Sabrina a new car after hers started acting up, an Audi Silver Spotless. "She's family now," my mother explained. "We just want her safe." I didn't argue. I just started noticing. Joint bank accounts appeared. Sabrina began joining Ryan at my parents' financial meetings. She asked questions about property values and long-term planning, words she barely seemed to understand but said with confidence. When I mentioned it, my mother brushed it off. "She's just showing interest, Hannah. You could try that sometime." The shift wasn't only financial, it was emotional. My father's praise for Ryan came easily now. He's really growing up. Sabrina's been so good for him. Meanwhile, my work barely registered. When I told them I'd been chosen to help design the city's new cultural center, my father nodded, then asked if Ryan had mentioned his new podcast idea. The imbalance wasn't new, but it had never been this stark. When my birthday came, my mother promised dinner. Just family, she said. The morning of, she texted Sabrina, surprised Ryan with plans. We'll reschedule. I spent the evening with friends instead, blowing out candles over a store-bought cake. When I posted a photo later, Sabrina commented, "So glad you found your people." The message was clear enough. That was when I began noticing the pattern. Every professional success I shared online was followed by a sudden family crisis. A promotion post, Sabrina felt judged and needed space. A project milestone, Ryan needed another family meeting. It wasn't coincidence. She was tracking my life, creating static whenever I started to shine. The more she inserted herself into their world, the smaller mine became. Still, I didn't want to believe my parents saw it too and chose to look away. I told myself they were blinded by charm, by the novelty of someone who called them mom and dad without obligation. I tried to hold my ground with quiet dignity, calls returned politely, texts kept brief, no public reaction. But the silence on their end grew louder with each passing month. Then came the conversation about the lake house. My mother mentioned it during lunch one afternoon, her tone light, almost casual. "We're transferring the deed to Ryan," she said, stirring her tea. "It makes sense for tax purposes." "The lake house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The one Grandpa built." She nodded. "You have your career, honey. Ryan needs more support." "Was that your decision or theirs?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "Don't make this about fairness, Hannah. We're just trying to help both of you in ways that fit your lives." That night, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out the manila folder I hadn't opened in years. Inside were copies of the estate documents we'd all signed 5 summers ago, pages filled with legal language about equal treatment and distribution of assets. My parents had insisted on it, then saying it was about avoiding confusion later. I remembered sitting across from their attorney, Arthur Green, signing beside their names. At the time, I hadn't understood how much protection those signatures might hold. A week later, my father texted about another family discussion regarding finances. "You don't need to come," he wrote. "We know you're busy." That was when I realized I'd already been written out of more than just dinners. Work became my refuge. At the firm, deadlines were clear, praise was earned, and no one asked me to apologize for ambition. Edward congratulated me on leading the cultural center design, calling it a career-defining project. Marion took me to lunch to celebrate and offered advice on managing the upcoming presentation. "You've done the hard part," she said. "Now let them see what you see." I smiled, grateful for a world where effort still meant something. But even that space wasn't safe for long. Sabrina started following my company's page on social media, leaving comments on project photos about how proud our family was of me. She followed my colleagues, liked every post that mentioned my name, and tagged Ryan in all of it. Then came the message from a coworker. "Your brother's girlfriend reached out about collaboration ideas." I laughed at first, but the humor drained quickly. She wasn't networking. She was marking territory. When she finally overstepped, it happened 2 weeks before my promotion was to be announced. My boss forwarded an email she'd sent him directly. She'd written that she was close to the family and concerned about my work-life balance. Edward handled it discreetly, deleting it and assuring me I had nothing to worry about. Still, I saw the pattern tightening like a knot. I decided that my upcoming promotion celebration wouldn't just mark a milestone, it would draw a line. Invitations went out to my colleagues, my mentors, and by choice, my parents and Ryan. When they RSVP'd yes, adding that Sabrina would join them, I simply replied, "Of course," because for the first time in months, I wanted them all in the same room. The night before the event, I stood by the window of my apartment, city lights flickering like the pulse of a life that still belonged to me. The tiramisu dish sat in the fridge again, untouched, but ready, a quiet reminder of how all this began. Tomorrow, everything would come to light, whether they were ready or not. The morning of my promotion celebration, the city felt unusually calm. From my office window, the skyline stretched under soft gray light glass towers, reflecting the first hints of daylight. On my desk sat the new nameplate waiting to be installed, Hannah Cole, Design Director. The promotion should have felt like a finish line, yet all I could think about was whether my parents would walk into that room tonight and see me for who I was, not for who I wasn't. Edward stopped by before leaving for his morning meeting. "Big night," he said, tapping the corner of the desk with his usual quiet pride. "You've earned every bit of it." I thanked him, keeping my voice even. When he left, I stood for a moment listening to the faint hum of printers down the hall. It felt like a pause before a storm. By evening, the Sterling room glowed with warm light and polished wood. I'd chosen it carefully elegant, but understated a space that reflected what I valued most about design balance and intention. The floor-to-ceiling windows caught the city lights, and soft jazz floated from a small trio tucked near the entrance. Colleagues arrived one by one, Marion with her warm hug, Caleb with a quick toast, the senior partners who clapped me on the shoulder. Each face carried genuine pride, and for a while it was easy to forget who hadn't arrived yet. At 7:30, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Running late. Sabrina needed to stop somewhere." I read it once and set the phone face down on the table. When the elevator doors finally opened 40 minutes later, every head in the room turned. My parents stepped out first. My father in his golf jacket, instead of a suit, my mother holding onto Sabrina's arm like she was the guest of honor. Ryan followed, scrolling through his phone, barely looking up. Sabrina wore white, a flowing dress that shimmered under the lights, catching attention the moment she entered. My mother called across the room, "Sorry we're late. Sabrina wanted to look perfect for your little work party." The words hung in the air too loud against the music. I forced a polite smile and met them halfway. "I'm glad you made it," I said. She scanned the room, her gaze sweeping across the guests. "This is nice," she said. "Smaller than I imagined." I didn't answer. Edward appeared beside me, introducing himself with his usual calm charm. "Hannah has built quite a reputation here," he said. My parents nodded, though my father's eyes were already on the buffet table. As more people gathered for the toast, Sabrina kept talking. "I could never work in an office," she said to one of my colleagues, laughing lightly. "I need creativity freedom. Sitting still all day would drain me." My mother nodded in agreement. "Sabrina has such an artistic soul." I caught Marion's raised eyebrow from across the room, and we exchanged the faintest smile of understanding. When the lights dimmed for speeches, my heart steadied. Edward clinked his glass and began, his voice carrying just enough weight to quiet the room. He spoke about commitment leadership and how design wasn't only about blueprints, but about empathy and vision. "Hannah represents that vision," he said, gesturing toward me. "Tonight we celebrate not just a promotion, but a philosophy." Applause followed, warm and sincere. My parents clapped lightly. Sabrina adjusted her phone camera, angling it toward herself. I stepped to the podium, notes in hand, but didn't need them. The words came easily, shaped by years of dedication. "Architecture is about people," I began, "about building spaces where they can live, learn, and connect." A few heads nodded, and I felt the rhythm of the room settle into calm focus. Then came Sabrina's voice, sharp against the quiet. "Can you speak up?" she called out. "Some of us can't hear." She was barely 10 feet away. The interruption drew a few awkward chuckles. I smiled and continued, raising my tone slightly. "This promotion represents years of collaboration and trust. Every project we design carries the imprint of those who helped shape it." As I spoke, my parents leaned toward each other, whispering. Sabrina stood abruptly, weaving her way toward the bathroom with a wine glass in hand. "Don't mind me," she said loudly, forcing another pause. I waited until the door closed before continuing. "Integrity is what sustains every structure, both the ones we build and the ones we live within." When I glanced toward the back, I noticed a familiar face. I hadn't expected Arthur Green. He sat near the wall briefcase by his chair, observing quietly. He gave a small nod when our eyes met. My heart kicked once, steady but deliberate. Halfway through the next paragraph of my speech, Sabrina reappeared, walking directly across my line of sight. She moved slowly. Her steps exaggerated the glass in her hand, filled nearly to the brim. I felt the room tighten. Then it happened. Her heel caught the edge of a chair and she stumbled forward, her wine arcing through the air. I stepped back just in time. The red splash hit the marble floor where I'd been standing seconds earlier. The glass shattered, scattering across the tiles. Sabrina gasped, straightening up. "Oh my God! Hannah, why did you move?" "You made me fall." Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Phones lifted instinctively. "Are you hurt?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She pushed me. Sabrina's voice rose. I saw it. She didn't, Marion said from the front row. You tripped. Sabrina clutched her hand dramatically. Look, I'm bleeding. A small scratch glistened under the light, barely visible. My mother rushed over with napkins. This is too much, she said, wrapping her arm around Sabrina's shoulder. Hannah, what were you thinking? My father joined them, shaking his head. You always take things too far. You couldn't just let tonight be peaceful. Across the room, my colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. Edward started to rise, but I lifted a hand to stop him. It's fine, I said quietly. No, it's not. Ryan snapped, finally looking up from his phone. You humiliated her in front of everyone. The tension spread like ripples on water. Sabrina sniffed, eyes glistening. I never wanted trouble, she said. I just wanted to celebrate your sister. I met her gaze. You walked straight toward me with a full glass. You're paranoid, she said softly, her tone shifting. You've been jealous since day one. My father's voice cut through. Enough. Hannah, apologize to her, right now. Apologize. The word echoed absurd and familiar. For what I asked. For embarrassing this family, he said. You can either make things right or consider yourself on your own. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the band stopped playing. I looked at the faces around me, colleagues who had seen me handle tough clients, late nights, impossible deadlines. None of that prepared me for this. Edward stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. Dr. Cole, perhaps this isn't the right setting. This is exactly the setting, my father interrupted. She needs to take responsibility. Arthur stood, then adjusting his jacket and picking up his briefcase. His expression was composed, his voice measured. Dr. Cole, Mrs. Cole. Perhaps it would help to revisit what responsibility truly means. My parents turned, startled. Arthur, my mother said, what are you doing here? He moved toward us, stopping beside me. I'm here as Hannah's guest, he said, and as someone familiar with your family's agreements. Sabrina took a small step back, her performance slipping for the first time. Arthur continued, his tone even. If there's to be a discussion about respect, we should ensure everyone understands what's at stake. My father's expression hardened. This is neither the time nor the place. I think it might be exactly the place Arthur said. Given what I've witnessed tonight, every eye in the room turned toward him. My mother's grip on Sabrina's arm tightened, her voice breaking slightly. Arthur, please, this isn't necessary. He opened the briefcase with slow precision, the metallic click echoing louder than the music ever had. On the contrary, he said, pulling out a thin folder. It's long overdue. And just like that, the room that had once felt like my professional sanctuary shifted into something else entirely, a courtroom made of glass and candlelight where truth was about to stand on its own. Arthur stood between me and my parents, a calm figure in a room that suddenly felt too still. The briefcase snapped open with a quiet authority that silenced even the soft background music. I could see my father's expression tighten, the practiced confidence he wore in hospitals giving way to confusion. My mother shifted beside him, her arms still looped protectively around Sabrina, who looked less certain than she had moments ago. Dr. and Mrs. Cole Arthur began, his tone polite but unwavering. It's been a long time since we last met. I was the attorney who drafted your estate documents 5 years ago. My father's brows drew together. This is highly inappropriate, he said. Whatever this is, it can wait until Monday. Arthur didn't raise his voice. I'm afraid not. The matter at hand was brought into this room the moment you publicly threatened to disown your daughter in front of 30 witnesses. The quiet in the Sterling room deepened. Even the servers had stopped moving. My mother's voice trembled slightly. Arthur, please. We're family friends. Surely you don't mean to make a scene, Mrs. Cole, he said evenly. What I mean to do is remind you of what you both signed in my office documents that were meant to ensure fairness and protection for both of your children. He drew a single folder from his briefcase, opening it on the table beside him. I have here your signatures and the notarized seal. I believe you'll recall the equal treatment clause. Ryan frowned. What clause? Arthur turned toward him. The one that guarantees equal inclusion and fair distribution among all beneficiaries unless one has committed a crime or is under legal restriction. Neither applies to your sister. My father exhaled sharply. We signed a lot of papers that day. I don't remember specifics. That's understandable, Arthur replied. Fortunately, I do. He glanced toward me. Miss Cole, do you have the messages we discussed? I nodded and handed him my phone. The light from the screen caught the edge of his glasses as he read. March 15th, he said, his voice steady. Don't come to dinner. Sabrina isn't comfortable. April 2nd, Easter. April 28th. Sunday dinner. May 12th. Mother's Day brunch. July 4th, family gathering. And August, second birthday dinner canceled. Each message represents exclusion without cause, which under the clause constitutes discriminatory treatment. My mother's face flushed. Those were private family matters. You can't use them like this. They became public, Arthur said gently, when your actions were performed in front of witnesses tonight. He looked to the room where several of my colleagues stood silent, uncertain whether to stay or step away. There's also the issue of financial disparity, he continued. Records show a $20,000 transfer for an apartment deposit and a $60,000 vehicle purchase, both benefiting Mr. Ryan Cole and his partner, Ms. Lane. That's none of your business, my father snapped. It became my business, Arthur said, when those transactions occurred after the signing of this equal treatment agreement. He opened another page. The clause requires retroactive balance for any financial advantage given to one beneficiary over another. That means identical compensation must be made to Miss Cole. My father blinked. You can't possibly expect— I don't expect, Arthur interrupted softly. The law does. Sabrina stepped forward, then her voice tight. I didn't take anything. Ryan's parents wanted to help us. Arthur met her eyes briefly. No one suggested otherwise, Ms. Lane. However, accepting financial gifts from a protected estate places you under its purview. The vehicles, the funds, the accounts, all are now subject to audit. The blood drained from her face. Audit, she whispered. Ryan's voice rose, cracking under pressure. This is ridiculous. You can't just freeze our money. Arthur closed the folder with a quiet finality. I can and I will until the trustees complete their review. He turned to my parents. As of this moment, any attempt to amend your estate in a way that disinherits or disadvantages your daughter will be legally void. The words landed like the click of a lock. My father took a slow breath, his composure unraveling. You've made a mistake, Arthur. This isn't how families handle things. Arthur's gaze softened. No, Dr. Cole, this is how families handle things when trust has already been broken. My mother's eyes filled. You're turning her against us, she said, voice catching. Arthur looked toward me. Miss Cole, would you prefer to address them yourself? I stepped forward, my pulse steady but loud in my ears. You wanted me to apologize tonight, I said, but I think what we really need is clarity. I turned to the guests who had watched everything unfold. For 8 months, I was told to stay away from family dinners, holidays, and even my birthday, all to make someone else comfortable. I said nothing. Tonight you demanded I apologize for something I didn't do. But I won't. Sabrina shook her head, forcing a brittle laugh. You planned this. You set us up. I met her gaze. I planned a promotion celebration. You planned a scene. Arthur cleared his throat softly. The clause also provides protection from retaliation or defamation, he added. So I would suggest we all refrain from further commentary. Edward stepped closer, his expression unreadable but calm. I think it's best if we conclude the evening, he said, his voice carrying just enough weight to guide the room. Hannah, congratulations again. The rest of this will sort itself out. He looked to my parents with quiet authority. I'll have someone see you out. For the first time in my life, my father didn't argue. He simply turned, guiding my mother toward the exit. Ryan followed a few steps behind, muttering something under his breath. Sabrina lingered long enough to throw me one last look, part disbelief, part resentment before trailing after them. When the door closed, the room stayed silent for a few long seconds. Then Marion approached, resting a hand on my arm. You handled that with more grace than most could manage, she said quietly. I nodded, unable to find words. Across the room, Arthur was collecting his documents, sliding each page back into its folder. I'll file the formal notice Monday morning, he said. You'll receive confirmation within the week. They'll owe you approximately $80,000 in restitution. $80,000, I repeated, startled. He nodded. Retroactive balance per the clause. He gave a small, approving smile. It was wise of you to keep everything documented. Edward rejoined us, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You're still our guest of honor, Hannah, he said. Don't let them take that from you. I looked around the space, the soft lighting, the untouched dessert table, the guests who were finally starting to murmur again. The party I'd planned for Pride had turned into a reckoning, yet the air no longer felt heavy. It felt clear. Arthur snapped his briefcase shut. I'll be in touch tomorrow, he said. Tonight, try to rest. After he left, I stood near the window overlooking the city. Reflections shimmered across the glass faces. I worked with people who had seen the worst part of my family and still looked at me with respect. It wasn't the evening I imagined, but maybe it was the one I needed. When the last guests began to leave, Marion pressed my hand gently. Go home, Hannah, she said. Let the truth settle where it belongs. The night air outside was cool, carrying the faint hum of traffic from the street below. I breathed it in and felt something uncoil inside me, something that had been wound tight for years. At home, the lights from the city spilled across my apartment walls. I set my phone on the counter, ignoring the growing list of missed calls. Somewhere across town, my parents were facing the first limits they'd ever been given, and for once, I didn't have to be the one explaining why. I poured a glass of water, watching the ripples settle, and finally let the quiet fill the room. Tomorrow would bring fallout questions, maybe even guilt. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt steady enough to meet it. Outside, the sky stretched wide and clear, as if the city itself had drawn a deep breath after too long holding one in. The morning after the party, sunlight fell across my living room in thin stripes. My phone sat silent on the counter, the notifications from last night already piling up calls from my mother, a few from Ryan, and one long text from my father that ended with, "You've made your choice." I didn't reply. I left the phone face down and let the quiet do its work. For the first time in months, there was no pressure to defend myself. By noon, Aunt Caroline called. Her voice carried that steady calm that always managed to find the truth before anyone else did. "Your mother's a wreck," she said. "She told the family you ambushed them with a lawyer." I sat down at the kitchen table, tracing the edge of a coaster. "They ambushed me for 8 months," I said quietly. "Arthur just reminded them of what they signed." Caroline exhaled. "I figured as much. Hannah, half the cousins are on your side, even if they won't say it out loud. Everyone saw this coming except your parents." Her words were kind, but they landed with a weight I wasn't ready for. "You did the right thing," she added softly. "Sometimes justice just looks loud before it settles." When I returned to work on Monday, the air in the office was different. Instead of awkward stares, there were nods of understanding. Edward called me into his office before lunch. "Friday was unexpected," he said. "But the way you handled it, steady, factual, composed, it impressed the board." He leaned back slightly, studying me. "You didn't just protect yourself, Hannah. You protected your reputation. That's no small thing." Later, Marion stopped by my desk with a paper cup of coffee. "I heard about the fallout," she said, setting it down beside me. "Everyone did. But you stayed grounded even when they tried to humiliate you. That's a strength most people don't have." I thanked her, though. Gratitude felt too small for what her support meant. That week, Arthur sent confirmation in writing the Equal Treatment Clause had been fully activated. My inheritance share, 1/3 of the estate, was frozen under my name, protected by trustees who would oversee any future distributions. More surprisingly, my parents were required to match prior financial gifts. The total came to just over $80,000. When the funds arrived, I opened the statement, stared at the balance for a long time, and felt nothing but quiet relief. I transferred half of it that same day to a scholarship fund for women pursuing architecture degrees, students like I had once been building futures without safety nets. The rest I set aside for something I hadn't named yet. Freedom, maybe, or closure. The messages from my parents didn't stop. They shifted tone instead. At first there was anger, long paragraphs from my mother about betrayal and embarrassment, short ones from my father accusing me of destroying the family's name. Then came guilt. "You know your mother's blood pressure isn't good. Ryan's devastated. He can't sleep. Sabrina's embarrassed to show her face. Each message ended with a plea for me to fix this. I didn't answer any of them. A week later, Ryan called from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up. "She's gone," he said without introduction. His voice was hoarse, unsteady. "Sabrina left me." I said nothing, waiting for what came next. "She said I misled her," he continued, words spilling fast, "that she thought I was coming into money, not losing it. She took the car, the apartment, everything. I heard a quiet sound in the background, maybe a sob, maybe frustration. "You were right about her," he said, "about all of it." "Ryan," I said carefully, "you need to focus on yourself now. Figure out what you want your life to look like without her or them making the choices." "They won't talk to me," he admitted. "Mom blames me for everything. Dad keeps saying I let the family down. I don't know where to go." "You have the guest house," I said. "They changed the locks." There was a long pause. "I can't help you right now," I said. "Not like before." He started to argue, then stopped. "I understand," he whispered. I needed to say, "I'm sorry." After he hung up, I sat at my kitchen table again, the same place I'd sat when all of this began. The city lights flickered outside, steady and indifferent. Whatever guilt I might have felt was tempered by something simpler, a sense that the balance had finally leveled. By the following month, the family's silence had turned into distance. My father resigned from his hospital board position, citing stress. My mother withdrew from her volunteer committees. The cousin group chat split quietly into two versions, one that included them, one that included me. Aunt Caroline sent the occasional update, but even she began to run out of words for what was left to repair. Work filled the spaces where family used to live. The Cultural Center project gained national attention, and a magazine profile followed my photo beside a headline about modern architecture and resilience. When the issue came out, my father must have seen it. A week later, an envelope arrived at my office. Inside was a clipping of the article folded neatly, no note attached. Just a faint scent of my mother's lavender hand cream. That night, I took a walk by the river, the city lights reflecting across the water. Everything felt both quieter and sharper the way peace sometimes does after too much noise. The truth was, I didn't know what came next. The legal fight was over, but the silence that followed was its own kind of reckoning. 2 months later, a letter arrived, not typed, but written in my mother's looping cursive. I sat down before opening it. "Hannah, we see now how blind we were. Sabrina played us, but we let her. We chose comfort over truth. We wanted family so badly that we ignored the daughter we already had. Your father hasn't said much, but he saves every article about your projects. He's proud even if he can't say it yet. We don't expect forgiveness, but if you ever decide to rebuild, we'll meet you halfway. Love, Mom." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my old estate papers. It didn't change anything, not yet, but it was the first sign of something different, something almost human again. That weekend, I met Marion for brunch. She listened quietly as I told her about the letter, then said, "Maybe that's enough for now. Let them sit in the truth. You don't have to carry it anymore." Outside, the city was warming into early spring. People filled the sidewalks, laughter carried from open cafe doors. I walked home with the sun on my shoulders and thought about what Aunt Caroline had said weeks earlier, how justice looks loud before it settles. Maybe she was right. When I got back to my apartment, the afternoon light was spilling through the window onto the table where I'd once set a dessert no one would eat. I poured a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and began drafting the proposal for a foundation that had been forming quietly in my mind, a fund for people estranged from their families who needed help starting over. It wasn't revenge. It was repair the kind that starts small and builds into something lasting. That night, as the city turned golden outside my window, I realized the story wasn't ending. It was just shifting shape. And for the first time in years, I was the one choosing how it would be built. Spring came early that year, bringing soft rain and a kind of quiet that felt earned. Work filled my days again, but it was a different kind of full-measured purposeful. The tension that once lived in my shoulders had eased, replaced by something steadier. I'd stopped checking my phone every morning for messages from home. The silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like space. 3 months after the party, Edward called me into his office. He closed the door and handed me a folder. "Sandra Morrison requested you personally," he said. "The board loved your presentation. They want you to lead Phase 2 of the Cultural Center expansion." I opened the folder, skimming the proposal, then looked up. "They want me to stay on as project lead." Edward smiled. "They want you to shape it. You've earned this, Hannah." That afternoon I met Sandra in the atrium of the Cultural Center. The glass ceiling above us threw soft light across the marble floors. She reached out to shake my hand. "I heard what happened at that party," she said. "Someone who can stand up under that kind of pressure can handle anything." I thanked her, unsure how to respond. She nodded toward the new gallery under construction. "Use your voice, Ms. Cole. You've proven it carries." Her words lingered. I spent the next few weeks immersed in design meetings, late nights drafting revisions, and quiet mornings walking the job site before crews arrived. The work reminded me why I'd chosen architecture in the first place, creating something that could hold people even when everything else around them shifted. One evening I returned home to find an envelope slipped under my door. It was from the law office, Arthur's neat handwriting across the front. Inside was the final confirmation of the estate settlement. My share was now independently held in a trust inaccessible to anyone but me. Attached was a short note in his precise script: "You can let this rest now. The law has caught up to fairness." I set the papers aside and made tea, letting the steam rise against the window. For the first time since that text message 8 months earlier, there was nothing left to defend. A week later, Aunt Caroline called again. "Your parents finally listed the lake house," she said. "Apparently they need to simplify." Her tone carried no judgment, just quiet understanding. "They're keeping their distance, but it's different now. More reflective." "Did they say anything about me?" I asked. "They mentioned the scholarship you started," she said. "Your mother said it was generous." That's something. It wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. As the months passed, life settled into its new shape. My apartment became a place of calm routine, fresh flowers on Sundays morning, runs by the river dinners with colleagues who had become friends. The foundation I'd created for students and estranged families gained traction. Letters began to arrive from people I'd never met. Stories of daughters, sons, siblings learning to start over. Reading them felt like looking into a mirror that reflected not just pain, but persistence. One evening while reviewing design renderings, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I hesitated, then answered. "Hannah." It was Ryan. His voice was quieter than I remembered. I didn't know who else to call. "What's wrong?" "Dad's been in the hospital. Nothing critical, they're saying. Stress, exhaustion." But Mom's beside herself. She asked me to reach out. I leaned against the counter, the words landing softly but deep. "Is he okay now? They think he'll be fine. He just needs rest." "But Hannah..." His voice faltered. "He asked about you. He said he regrets how things went." I didn't speak right away. Ryan filled the silence. "Mom wrote you that letter months ago. She meant every word. I think he's just too proud to say the same." "Tell them I'm glad he's all right," I said. "That's enough for now." Ryan exhaled. "I will. And I'm getting help too. Therapy. Trying to understand how I let all that happen." "That's good," I said. "It's a start." After the call, I stood by the window watching the city hum beneath the fading light. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was movement. Small, careful steps toward something that might one day resemble peace. A few weeks later, Sandra invited me to a gala at the Cultural Center to unveil the final model. The evening was polished, but intimate architects, donors, and staff gathered beneath the vaulted skylights. When Sandra spoke on stage, she mentioned resilience not as a buzzword, but as a principle that shaped every line of the project. Resilience, she said, is the ability to build again, not despite the cracks, but because of them. When she gestured toward me, the applause felt different this time, less about achievement, more about understanding. After the event, Edward caught me by the exit. "You've handled everything this year with grace," he said. "The firm's better for it." Walking home that night, I thought about how quickly the definitions of family and success had shifted. What once felt like loss had become room to grow. That weekend, a package arrived at my office. No return address, just a single line on the card inside for your next project. Beneath it lay a leather-bound sketchbook, the kind my father used to give me when I was in college. Tucked into the back was a photo of the three of us at the lake house years ago, my parents' younger Ryan grinning, my own hair sunlit and wild. The corner of the photo was smudged, as if someone had held it too long before sending it. I closed the cover and set it on my desk. I didn't need to call to know who it came from. That night, I added one line to the first page of the new sketchbook. Rebuilding isn't about going back. It's about starting over, this time on solid ground. As spring turned to summer, the foundation awarded its first round of scholarships. One recipient, a young woman named Maya, came by to meet me. She'd grown up in foster care, worked through community college, and now wanted to study architecture. She stood in my office doorway, hands clasped, eyes bright. "You don't know how much this changes things," she said. I smiled. "I might have an idea." When she left, I found myself looking at the photo again. The lake house behind us, sunlight over the water. For years, I'd wanted my family to see me. Now I understood visibility wasn't something you were granted, it was something you chose. That night, I walked along the river until the sky turned violet. The city lights reflected against the water, steady and familiar. Somewhere across town, my parents were finding their own way through the wreckage. I didn't know if we'd ever sit at the same table again, but for the first time, that thought didn't ache. It just felt honest. And as I watched the current move beneath the bridge, slow and unhurried, I realized that was enough for now. By late summer, the foundation had grown faster than I expected. What started as a small idea in my apartment had turned into a program with donors, mentors, and a list of students eager to learn. Maya was the first to join as an intern, her energy filling the quiet corners of the office. She asked thoughtful questions and worked late without being asked. Sometimes watching her reminded me of my younger self, eager, uncertain, and trying hard not to show it. One Friday, she knocked softly on my door before leaving. "Ms. Cole," she said, "I just wanted to thank you again for this opportunity. You've changed my life." I smiled. "You changed it yourself, Maya. We just built the space." She hesitated at the door. "Still," she said, "it matters." After she left, I sat for a while looking at the city lights outside my window. The skyline I once measured by ambition now felt like something quieter, a landscape of lessons learned the hard way. That night, I received a call from Aunt Caroline. "Your parents are having dinner with the Bennetts tomorrow," she said. "They asked if you'd like to join." I almost said no out of habit. But then I thought about my mother's letter, my father's silence, and the photo they'd sent. "Tell them I'll come," I said. The next evening, I drove to the restaurant. It was the same one we'd gone to for birthdays years ago, before the distance had settled in. When I walked in, my mother's face softened in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. My father stood awkwardly, unsure whether to hug me or offer a handshake. I chose for him and embraced them both lightly. Dinner began quietly. Small talk, a few cautious smiles. My mother asked about work, about the foundation. My father mentioned the new hospital wing he was helping design. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When the waiter brought dessert, my father cleared his throat. "Your mother and I wanted to say something," he said, "about the past year." My mother reached for his hand. "We hurt you," she said, her voice low but steady. "We believed the wrong person, and we made you prove what we should have already known." My father nodded. "I was proud of you, Hannah. I just didn't know how to show it. Everything you did, the way you handled yourself, it opened my eyes." There was a long silence. Then he said almost quietly, "We'd like to make things right, if you'll let us." The words sat between us, fragile and real. I didn't rush to fill the space. Some things needed to breathe before they could settle. Finally, I said, "We can start by being honest from now on. No performances, no pretending." My mother smiled through tears. "That sounds fair." After dinner, as we walked to the parking lot, my father stopped beside me. "You've built something remarkable," he said. "I hope you know that." "I do now," I said. "Thank you." The drive home was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. I thought about how much had changed, not just in them, but in me. The person who once waited for approval no longer needed it. 2 weeks later, the foundation held its first public event, an open house fundraiser for new mentorship programs. The team worked all morning transforming the cultural center's atrium into a bright, welcoming space. Sandra gave the opening remarks, then handed me the microphone. I looked out at the crowd, colleagues, students, donors, friends. Even my parents stood near the back side by side. When I started this, I said I wanted to create something lasting out of what felt broken. Every wall we design begins with trust. Tonight we're building that together. Applause rose softly at first, then grew. As I stepped down, Maya handed me a folder. The first batch of thank you letters, she said proudly. Inside were handwritten notes from scholarship applicants, each story different, but connected by the same thread, a longing for belonging, for a second chance. Later, as guests mingled, I noticed my father speaking with Edward near the refreshments table. My mother chatted with Marion, laughter soft but genuine. It struck me then how far we had all come from that night at the Sterling Room. When the evening wound down, my father approached. "That was impressive," he said, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I can see why everyone here respects you." "It's a team effort," I said. He nodded. "Still, you're the one steering it." He hesitated, then added, "I don't expect you to forget everything, but I hope you'll let us keep showing up." "I will," I said simply. After they left, I stayed behind helping staff gather empty glasses and fold table linens. When the last of the lights dimmed, Sandra came over. "You've turned your story into something powerful," she said. "That's rare." I smiled. "I just stopped trying to fix what didn't want to be fixed." Sometimes, she said, that's when the real repair begins. When I got home that night, the apartment felt different, warmer somehow. On the counter sat the leather-bound sketchbook my father had sent. I opened it again, tracing the line I'd written weeks ago. Rebuilding isn't about going back. It's about starting over, this time on solid ground. For the first time, the words felt complete. A few days later, a check arrived in the mail from my parents made out to the foundation. The note inside was short, for the next generation. Love, Mom and Dad. I smiled, folded the note carefully, and tucked it into the back of the sketchbook beside the old photo. The following weekend, I took Maya and a few interns to tour the completed cultural center. The space gleamed in the afternoon sun. Clean lines, open galleries, quiet corners for reflection. Visitors moved slowly, pausing to take in the light. Maya stopped near a brass plaque by the entrance. "Ms. Cole," she said, pointing. "Look." The inscription read, "Designed by Hannah Cole and team, dedicated to community resilience and renewal." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The years of struggle, the distance, the silence, it all seemed to fold into that one word, renewal. When we left the building, the air outside was cool and bright. The interns laughed, walking ahead, their voices echoing down the steps. I lingered for a moment, watching the reflection of the building in the glass door. It looked steady, anchored. That night, I sent a message to my parents with a photo of the plaque. My mother replied almost instantly, "It's beautiful. We're proud of you." No speeches, no apologies, just those words. I put the phone down and stood by the window, the city lights stretching in every direction. Justice had come quietly, not as triumph, but as balance restored. And as the evening settled around me, I understood what Arthur had meant. Months ago, the law had caught up to fairness, but life had finally caught up to peace. Tomorrow would bring something new, a design review, a scholarship meeting, maybe another letter from a student who believed they could start again. But for tonight, that was enough. Winter arrived slowly that year, settling over the city like a blanket. By then, the foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. New mentors, partnerships, and a waiting list of students eager to begin. The Cultural Center's final report listed record attendance. Every week brought another letter from someone who'd been helped by our work. Some days I read them at my desk with coffee in hand, tracing the words of strangers who somehow felt like family. One afternoon, I received an unexpected envelope, handwritten and neat. It was from Ryan. Inside was a short letter and a photo of him standing outside a small counseling center. "I'm working here now," he'd written, "helping others rebuild after mistakes. Thank you for not closing the door on me completely." I held the photo for a long time. He looked older, steadier, like someone who had finally decided who he wanted to be. A week later, my parents called. This time it wasn't about apologies or explanations, it was an invitation. They were hosting a quiet dinner, just family, no guests, no pretenses. Oh, I hesitated before saying yes. When I arrived, the house felt smaller than I remembered, but warmer. My mother opened the door with a smile that reached her eyes. My father stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, the smell of rosemary filling the air. For the first time in years, the table was set for 4. Dinner was simple. There was laughter in places where there had once been silence. My father asked about the next phase of the foundation. My mother listened without interrupting. When Ryan spoke about his new work, there was pride in her voice, not pity. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Before I left, my father handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a silver drafting compass, polished and worn from years of use. "It was mine," he said. "I thought you might like to have it now." I turned it in my hand, feeling the smooth metal, the faint etching of his initials near the hinge. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded. "You've built things I never could. I'm glad you didn't let us stop you." It was the closest he'd ever come to saying he was proud. On the drive home, snow began to fall, light at first, then steady. The streets shimmered under the streetlights, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the weight of what had been lost. Only gratitude for what had survived. That winter, the foundation launched its mentorship network across the state. Maya became its first coordinator, guiding others with the same heart she'd shown since the day we met. During the closing ceremony of our first year, she surprised me with a plaque. It read, "For building spaces where strength and grace can coexist." I stood beside her as applause filled the room, thinking about how far all of us had come from that night when everything fell apart. Later, standing outside under the cold evening sky, I thought about the path that led me here, the hurt, the silence, the courage it took to draw a line and stand behind it. It wasn't revenge that healed me. It was rebuilding piece by piece until the person I'd become no longer needed approval to feel whole. In the end, justice hadn't arrived with noise or spectacle. It came quietly in the form of peace, the kind that lingers steady and earned. My family would never be what it once was, but maybe that was the point. Some stories don't end with reunion. They end with understanding. And sometimes that's enough. As I locked the office that night, the city lights reflected in the glass doors, casting a soft glow over the words etched into the foundation's plaque. Respect is non-negotiable. I smiled because that truth had carried me through every season since. If you've ever had to fight for your place in your own family, I hope my story reminds you that strength doesn't always roar. It often whispers, "I'm still here." And sometimes that's the loudest sound of all. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a little hope tonight. And remember, no matter who forgets your worth, never forget it yourself.